I built my business to 6 figures before I left my full-time job. Then I did it with the strategy we're talking about today. When you're struggling to grow your business, it can feel hopeless. When you're at zero, it's hard to imagine a thriving business, but you won't stay at zero with this plan. Today, we're talking about leveraging other people's audiences through guest podcasting. This is the easiest way to grow your audience, build your reputation, and earn your audience's trust. Listen to my episode with Tom Schwab of Interview Valet. Tom is the author of Podcast Guest Profits and One Conversation Away. And he will tell us how to build your business through podcasting, so stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Tiny Marketing. I'm Sarah Noel Block and I teach small marketing departments that are tired of feeling overwhelmed and under-resourced how to build and manage effective and efficient marketing strategies that work for them. Get ready, it's time to dig in and get a big impact with your tiny team.
I believe that everyone's biggest problem is obscurity. As a business owner, there's lots of people that you could help. The biggest problem is they don't know you exist. Hi, I'm Tom Schwab. I'm the founder of Interview Valet, and one of the hacks that I have learned that works really well for me, especially today, is leveraging other people's audiences. 20 years ago, we used to do this with guest blogging. 30 years ago, it was as seen on television. Today, it's really being a podcast guest, leveraging other people's audiences, get that know, like, and trust, and really the idea of making every minute work for you. As a small business owner, there's a lot of things you can do. You want to make sure that you're playing to your strengths. And we started to do this over 9 years ago, built a team around it. And now I'm honored to lead a team of 30 people in Europe and North America that help small businesses, that help authors, coaches, brands to get on targeted podcast interviews so they can speak directly to their ideal customers and grow their business. And if I can do it from Kalamazoo, Michigan, you can do it from wherever you are.
You are really speaking my language with the know, like, trust factor. I shout that from the rooftops. Anybody who's trying to start a business, that's what you need to do. You need people to know that you exist and then care that you exist and then trust you. And you can only do that by educating people. And podcasts are an amazing way to do it.
And, I went back later in life to get my MBA in marketing, but so much of the stuff that we're taught, it works for Coke and Pepsi and Procter and Gamble. I'm sorry, I don't have the marketing teams or the marketing budget to compete on that. And so it's like I look at it and say, what is my superpower? What can I do? What brings me energy? Right. And if you tell me write a blog, I'll clean up my office and go to the dentist before I write the blog. For me, that's a homework assignment. But if you're like, hey, do you want to talk with Sarah for a half hour? Oh, yeah, that would be great. And to create that content and then to be able to repurpose that into blogs and social media, it's easier. And I think it helps you stand out, right? Is my social media campaign going to look better than Procter and Gamble? Probably not. But actually speaking to someone, maybe I can stand out a little bit.
The longer I'm doing podcasts, the longer I've had my own podcast and I've been guesting on others, the more I love it. The relationship building that happens during that process of interviewing someone or being interviewed and the promotion. And, before the interview even starts, you have some back and forth. I have built the most important relationships in my business through podcasting, and it has done wonders.
It's last year, my phrase was one conversation away. And, everybody in marketing says, you're one funnel away. Nothing good in my life has ever come through a funnel, right? I didn't meet my bride because I had this perfect funnel and 7 billion people came through it. All things of value come from a conversation, right? Your next new great client is going to come from a conversation. Your next new employee, your next new partner, all of those things. And I think the more I can do to put myself in those conversations, the bigger of an impact it'll have. And as a business owner, that's one of those things, that your superpower that you bring. You're the figurehead of the company. You're the spokesperson. You're the one that has to have those conversations.
And it really kind of fills your cup, where it's like you mentioned blogging. Blogging is a pretty isolating marketing adventure. You're on your own, you're doing research. And if you love writing, that's perfect for you. But I love writing. I'm a writer, and I need those conversations and that connection with people to really like energize me and fill my cup in a way that other marketing can't do.
Often I find I'll spend time where I tell myself I'm working on marketing, and what I'm really doing is trying to avoid customers. Right? Because I'm working hard. I'm writing a blog. I'm doing some social media posts, all the rest of that. But is it really connecting with the customer? Am I getting that feedback? Am I learning as I'm doing that too? And I think especially now with like things like Chat GPT, I think written content is going to be easier than ever to make, right? If it takes me an hour to write a great blog, there's going to be somebody else that, with AI comes up with 60 blogs in 60 minutes. Will I be able to compete with that? Or will everybody just become noise? Whereas if I'm actually talking, if I'm actually on a video, at least right now with AI, it's me, right? And
Yeah.
one of those things where you can't say enough of the wrong things to the right people or the right things to the wrong people, right? So when somebody hears you for 30 or 45 minutes, they either turn you up or turn you off. And that's fine, right? If they turn you off and you're not for them, great. There's somebody else that is. Don't waste their time. Don't waste your time. You don't want to attract more leads. You want to attract more ideal customers.
Yeah, the right leads. It's about attracting and repelling, attracting the right people and repelling the wrong people.
Yes.
And podcasting is a good way to do that too, because your personality is showing through. And if you are not the right vibe for somebody, they can tell during that and they can self-eliminate themselves, and it saves everybody time.
That's one of those great things. There's a lot of problems in the world, but there's no better time to be alive, right? 30 years ago, your market was, who could ever drive to your store or your marketing agency or whatever it is. Now the world is our marketplace. And so when we're geographically constrained, you had to serve all people, right? And be all things to all people. Now
Mm-hmm.
you can be very specific and find your people and,
Yeah.
find that tribe and let them find you. And that's where, if you look at it, those will be your most profitable customers, your happiest customers, the ones that bring you and your team the most joy, and the ones that bring you new customers too.
Yeah. And niching down just makes everything easier, because you don't have to, and you shouldn't, talk about anything and talk to everybody, because you just dilute your message and dilute the problem that you solve. It benefits nobody.
It's like that person that says it works for everyone.
It
Um,
doesn't.
And they're either lying to you or they're lying to themselves, right? If you want today more than ever, you want specialists, right? If you go into a doctor, a hospital, you don't want the doctor that does everything, right? You
No.
want the specialist that just does the one thing that you need. And I think it's the same thing on the internet too. If you serve all people and say that you can help everyone, people say, well, I can help no one.
Yes. So the first learning point that you brought up was that podcast guesting is what guest blogging was in 2003. And I was literally having this conversation on LinkedIn yesterday about how like the big benefit of guest blogging is getting in front of other people's audiences and converting them to your audience, and the backlinks of that. When I first started my business, LinkedIn and guest blogging were huge aspects of my business because I didn't have an audience. I needed to build that. And now I can't even count the amount of podcasts I've been on as a guest. But all of those backlinks and then just people learning about who I am through guesting has had an amazing impact on my business. I want to hear your perspective on it.
We've had some people that do podcast guesting just for the SEO, right? I think the first client that really pointed it out to me, Q Harrison Terry, he's the now he's the director of growth at Mark Cuban's companies. And while he was in college, he had a company and he came to us and said, yeah, I just want to do it for the backlinks, right?
You do. Every show notes page you're on, you're getting backlinks. It's amazing.
Well, you got to be careful on that, right? Because if you go on Blog Talk Radio or something, they don't have show notes. They don't have that backlink. So you lose out on that value. But the flip side too is that, you could say, oh, do you want to go on the Tim Ferriss show? Or do you want to go on an undergraduate podcast at Harvard that has 200 downloads? Well, if you want a backlink from harvard.edu and say you were featured on Harvard, that is gold.
That's
right?
True.
And the other thing is today, it's not what you say about yourself, it's what other people say about you. So if somebody Googles your name, what are they going to find? Are they going to find somebody with the same name? Are they going to find only your stuff? Or are they going to see all of these interviews that you've been on? And they're going to say, wow, Sarah is really an in-demand person. She's an expert because she's been on all of these other things. We had one of our clients had reached out to someone to pay them incredible money to build a Wikipedia page for him, right? Because he wanted a Wikipedia page. Mm-hmm. And luckily, the guy was smart or the person he reached out to was honest. And he said, you know what? You really don't need a Wikipedia page. You've been on so many different podcasts that you now show up in the Google Knowledge panel. And so he said, and if you've seen these, right, you Google somebody's name, Google will put it up even before the paid ads, even before the Wikipedia, Google Knowledge panel. So put in like a celebrity, something like that. Often on a desktop, you see it on the right-hand column. And it will say, okay, here's the person, here's their social media, here's a little summary.
Oh.
That comes up before ads. And all of that comes from you being mentioned in other people's audience, right? You could have a great podcast, but if the only time you're mentioned is your own show, you won't drive that. But Google's starting to think it's like, wow, if, Tom Schwab, if people are mentioning him, he's been on all these other podcast interviews, this must be the person they're thinking of. And so that is, you think about how much people pay for first place on Google or first ad, that's expensive. Well, if you get enough backlinks, if you get enough mentions, right, Google will just say, okay, here's the knowledge link. Here's what they're looking for. And that's priceless.
That's brilliant. I've never heard of that. So I'm going to be on the look. I just Googled my name. But I mean, one thing I noticed when I was Googling my name is the huge footprint from all of the podcasts I've been on. Like, it's insane the footprint that you can gain from guesting on other podcasts.
And it used to be that every podcast was a good podcast. So I've been on over 1,200 podcast interviews, and in some ways I look at that as shame, right? It's like if you aren't that discerning, it's like the person that will speak anywhere. They'll speak at the opening of an envelope. But now often you'll see your last podcast interview or your last video shows up in your search. So you want to be very discerning, right? And I
just noticed that the most recent one I was on or that published is the first one that showed up.
Yeah.
And I didn't even know it was published yet. Like I hadn't gotten the email yet.
So you've got to be careful with that and make sure that any appearance that you're on is consistent with your brand and would help a sale along, right? I call
Yeah.
some podcasts Wayne's World podcasts. Remember, two guys in their mom's basement,
Yeah.
right?
Of course I remember
If
Wayne's
you're
World.
trying to close this, six-figure consulting deal and it's going well, and all of a sudden it needs the CEO's sign off, and they Google your name, and the first podcast that pops up is one of these podcasts, that will kill the deal faster than anything. Or if you reach out to a podcaster and say, I think I'd be great for your podcast, I'd love to be on, and they Google you, and the last one they find is, a lousy little podcast, they'll just be like, yeah, no, I don't want this person. So you should be always conscious of the technical term for it is brand safety. So you want to make sure that your brand always looks good wherever you are.
Yeah, I am glad you brought that up because that's not something that people think about a lot. And something I noticed because Interview Valet, they reach out to me occasionally with guests. And I noticed how you pitch my podcast to your guests. And it's always like, this is the value that you would get from being on this show. So you come from a very marketing POV when you're pitching.
Yeah. And we don't use the word pitch internally. I understand where it comes from. Like you pitch an idea, you pitch a story, but all of a sudden we've gone from pitching an inanimate object to pitching a human being. So we always look at it as introducing. And so we want to know what the podcast is about. We want to know what value the guest brings. And then we make that introduction, right? Because there's so many robo pitches out there right now. For years, I haven't had a podcast, but I still get pitched probably 3 or 4 times a day because I'm on a list, and everybody loves the podcast and wants to be a guest. And it's like, more is not better. Better is better, right? And the better the podcast is, the more pitches they get. And most of them are just going to blackhole.com.
Yeah, I have noticed that you're very strategic. The people that you introduce me to for my show, they are always spot on. I'm like, yeah, that person makes a lot of sense to be on the show.
And in the past, we've been doing this now for 9 years. There wasn't a lot of data behind it. And now over the years, as the data has gotten better and better, it makes it so much easier, both from our internal databases, all the databases we license. Without that, I think most of it is podcast guessing, right? That's what we used to do 9 years ago when, well, I think it'd be good. Let's give it a try. No, and now it's really gotten more advanced, and it makes it better for the guest, for the host, and for the audience.
Yeah, you actually knew more about my podcast than I did, like analytic wise. I turned to my husband one night when I'm like, I received an interview an introduction from Interview Valet. I'm like, and I actually told to him, I'm like, they know more about my podcast than I do. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I need to figure out how they knew that.
Well, we are a people-driven company, but we make decisions based on data. The old phrase, in God we trust, everyone else bring data. Because when people come to us, they partner with us, they hire us to get results, not just random interviews. And I really look at this as a marketing channel, right? Everybody's most valuable resource is their time. And small business owners need to make the best use of all of their time, right? It's not like you've got a huge marketing department and interns and everything like that. You've got to pick your channels on which ones give you the best results, which ones give you the best interviews. And most of us don't have time, 4 or 5 years to learn something, right? Better figure out it from the beginning, get the results, and then keep doubling down on that.
Yeah, there's a huge benefit from borrowing other people's audiences that a lot of small businesses don't realize the impact of, or maybe they just don't realize that that's an option. But that's a hack. That's a hack for growing your audience. It's like podcast guesting, guest blogging has been huge for me. And then being a webinar partner with companies that share the same audience as me, growing my list that way, another huge thing. But it's always been about borrowing other people's audiences.
Uh, we call it a hack, but it's been used since before there was the word hack, right? So
Yeah.
get mentioned in the newspaper, right? Borrow their audience, or you could start your own newspaper, your choice, or, get seen on television, right? Would you rather, if you wanted to be seen by Oprah's audience, right? Back in the day, you could either start a show and build it just like Oprah, or you could just get on her show.
Yeah.
Right. And one of them's a whole lot easier. And sometimes I feel guilty when I say this because it's like, literally, I was studying for this, preparing 15 minutes beforehand, right? We'll finish up, we'll say goodbye, I'll go on with my day. And Sarah and her team have all the work now that they've got to edit it, they've got to put it out there, they've got to promote it, and I'll promote it too. But when you look at that, it's like, one person here gets the majority of the benefit and the other person gets the majority of the work.
Facts. We're ending this interview now. You've taught me something. Goodbye.
Well, it's all that thing of return on investment, right? There's a time to have your own podcast. And sometimes people will say, should I be a guest or a host? I'm like, it's not an either or, right? It's like, should I be an Uber driver or an Uber passenger? Well, it depends what your goals are, right? And if your goals are to nurture your current leads, nurture your current audience, being a host is an amazing way to do that, right? To build that authority. If you're looking to go out there and get new clients, get new leads, get new backlinks, you've got to go into somebody else's audience, right? This idea of if I build it, they will come. That's never worked, right? And so I think this, while it's a podcast guesting, is a new tactic, if you will, because podcasting is relatively new. If you look at leveraging other people's audiences, that's a time-tested strategy.
It really is. It's just you need to rethink what that looks like every year. What does that look like this year? And yeah, I can say with my personal experience that podcast guesting has been huge for me. And for my own clients, I'm always recommending that you need to get in front of other people's audiences. I work with a lot of small businesses and startups where they don't have an audience yet. And this is the least frictional way to do it. Frictional. I'm pretty sure I made up that word, but you get it. There's no friction to it.
And what do all business owners love to talk about, right? They love to talk about their business and their kids, right? But that's redundant because their business is their kid, right? And they're the expert in that. So when you go on a podcast, you've got that expertise. And actually, a friend helped me with this early on because I would always say, well, I'm not an expert. And he's like, if you look at the legal definition of an expert, it's someone by their training, their knowledge, their experience has more knowledge than the average person. So it doesn't mean you're the world-renowned, undisputed expert, right? But if you working in your business, 60, 80 hours a week, you've got expertise, right? You've got insights, you've got vision on that, where the market is, where it's going, even your opinion. I was going to say, that's the one thing that I'm the world-renowned, undisputed expert in, is my opinion.
Your own thoughts.
Yeah. And I'm not going on a podcast interview and somebody's asking me about, car mechanics or, whatever it is, if that's not my expertise. So it's really nice that you can just talk about what your passions are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I want to take this one step further. So you're borrowing other people's audiences by being a guest. What is a good way to capture that audience?
Yeah. I love how Rand Fishkin from SEO Moz talks about it. He said, the best way to sell something today is not to sell anything, but to earn the respect, awareness, and trust of those who might buy. Now, after you've done that, you still need to figure out a way to move them from being a passive listener to an active visitor to an engaged lead, right? So often I see people at the end of an interview, somebody will say, so Tom, how can people get in touch with you? And they'll go, oh, you can find me here on Instagram and here on LinkedIn, and you can go to this website and that website. And I'm amazed. It's like, don't you understand this is podcasting, right? Somebody is driving while they're doing this. They're working out. 70% of podcast interviews are listened to sped up. So you should always give them one place to go. And typically we call this a welcome page. So here, if you want to see what a welcome page is, I'll make one here. Go to interviewvalet.com/tiny marketing. It's not up yet, but it will be. So
So
don't Google
don't
it
Google it
now.
now.
It will be up in the next half hour. And so what would that would be a page that's like, okay, picture of Sarah and the podcast artwork. It will give some background of everything we talked about. And then the 3 calls to action. Our testing over the last 9 years has always been 3 calls to action. So every digital marketer will tell you one. I don't disagree with them, but our testing has always shown if you meet people where they are, it always works best. So for example, the small call to action would be, if you're wondering, will podcast interview marketing work for me? Just come back there and there's an assessment, right? 10 questions, rank yourself. Doesn't take much time or money, right? The medium, yes, is going to take a little bit more time or money invested. So for me, that's always, hey, if you want a free copy of my book, Podcast Guest Profits, How to Grow Your Business with the Targeted Interview Strategy, you can go there. I'll send you a free copy of the book. So a little bit more of a commitment. And then the heck yes, right? If somebody hears you on a podcast interview and they come with credit card in hand, wanting to talk to the wizard, don't slow them down, right? Don't make it hard for them. So for us, the heck yes is always, if this makes sense, right? If you'd like to talk about how you could leverage other people's audience with podcast guesting, just come back to that page and I'll put my calendar link and we could do a discovery call on that. So the idea is give them one place to go, an evergreen site for evergreen traffic, give them 3 ways to say yes. So meeting them where they are. And this is the only way that I have found where you can attribute traffic. So, if somebody hits that page, that's where they came from.
That is really smart, creating a landing page for your guest opportunities. I like that. And I'm going to create one probably later today. I have a media page, but it wouldn't be the same.
And some people will do it or they'll just put like /podcast interviews and they'll do it for all of them. But the best practice is to do it for each interview. That way you can attribute the traffic. And it's a little bit different than, say, a regular landing page. Our testing has shown always leave the navigation on there, right? If somebody hears you and then they want to look around their site, let them do it, right? If they're that interested. Whereas most of the time, a landing page or a squeeze page doesn't have navigation.
That's true. Okay, I like that idea. And, to shorten the duration, like if you do a lot of podcast interviews, you could duplicate that page and change the URL out and just like the welcome text and boom.
Exactly. And really all you have to change is the hero image, which is the podcast artwork, the podcast name, the podcaster's name, and then pronouns that go along with it. Besides that, it's a similar page. But what you want to always do from a marketing perspective is make sure that the search engines aren't crawling that page, because you'll get dinged for duplicate content. And if people start finding it on the search engines, then it'll mess up your analytics, right? Did they find me from a search or did they find me from the podcast?
Yeah. Smart. I learned a lot in this interview. If you're wondering if there's a benefit to hosting, you learn a freaking lot from your guests. I would say the amount of things that I learned from my guests and the relationships that I've built make it all worth it. All of the editing and promotion that I have to do that you don't have to do. So thank you so much for joining me today. Is there anything that you want to add before we wrap up?
I would just say that idea of you could help a lot of people, right? Often it seems like it's the loudest person that's getting heard, not the best person, the one that can throw the most money around. And there's a lot of problems in the world, like I said, but there's no better time to be alive. Here I am. I live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? And through the wonders of the internet and podcasting, really for not a whole lot of investment, you can reach the world and you can help the world. So I would just encourage you as a podcast guest, as a podcast host, if you're a writer, then write, but do something to help other people. We're blessed to be a blessing. Share what you've learned with them. And if we can help you in any way, feel free to just come back to interviewvalet.com/tiny marketing. And I'll have that page up here in the next half hour.
Awesome. I will make sure to put that in the show notes page. And we could wrap it up right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow me on the social medias at Sarah Noel Block and on TikTok at Tiny Marketing. If you have any questions about this episode, go to the show notes page and submit it for us to answer. See you next time. Hello, and thank you for joining Tiny Marketing. I help tiny marketing departments create consistent content that builds trust with their audience. Book done-for-you content marketing at sarahnoelblock.com. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. See you next time, friends.